What you just saw my amazing self here perform was known as a tuck and roll. What the tuck and roll does is allows you to prevent breaking your brittle bones and instead converting your momentum and energy into a beautiful, neat roll. This is a mechanic featured in the game Ocarina of Time where Link, the player, can perform a roll in order to prevent taking fall damage. Interestingly enough, the tutorial in this game is very optional in a lot of ways. Most of the characters that you come across you actually don't have to talk to. There are a few requirements, of course, where you have to learn something, one of them being the Deku Scrub here, which actually tells you about this roll feature.
Oh, forgive me, Master. If I give you a tip, will you let me go? When you jump off a high cliff, if you hold forward, you will roll on the ground when you land and won't get hurt from the fall. I can't guarantee it will work, though, if the cliff is really, really high.
Based on what this scrub has told us, I think it is safe to assume that as long as the cliff isn't too high, we should be able to safely roll out of most damage. Let's try it out. Ooh! Well, maybe I was expecting too much. Maybe that was a bit too high. Let's try something a little bit smaller. Well, you didn't even roll that time. I guess you didn't take damage at least. So, what determines whether we stick the landing or are met with a terrible fate? That fate being post-traumatic arthritis. That is what we will set out to do. Like any sane, normal person, I began jumping off of every cliff I could think of in Hyrule, hoping that maybe I could form some form of hypothesis. Death Mountain Trail is a pretty signature location. Right here you see the main cliff with two platforms on the side. I tested jumping off of various parts of this through all versions of the game, the 3DS, GameCube, and N64. On both the N64 and GameCube, jumping from the very top of the cliff to the bottom resulted in taking damage no matter how I threw myself off. As for the smaller cliff here, you wouldn't actually perform any sort of roll, but you also wouldn't take any damage. This middle cliff right here is actually the sweet spot where we can see if we don't hold forward, we take damage, otherwise if we do, we actually roll out of it. As for the 3DS version, the biggest and shortest fall here are the same, where you can't avoid it or it doesn't take any damage. However, here is where the interesting part comes in. This middle platform here actually is one where no matter what you do here, I am still taking damage, as you can see, even if I hold forward. After several attempts to roll on the lowest platform here, I was not able to successfully perform a roll. And believe me, I jumped off this a lot of times. This at least answers the immediate question of whether there's any difference between the versions, specifically the 3DS being the outlier, of course. I've played the 3DS version quite a bit for certain reasons, so I know that the roll is a feature that is possible. I just didn't know how to activate it. So what better place to start next than the Deku Tree, where you actually learn this ability. One interesting fact about this roll feature is that if you only take a half a heart of damage when falling, that actually is the moment where you can theoretically roll out of it. If the fall is too far, you will actually take a full heart of damage, which indicates that you were not able to roll out of that. One thing I couldn't quite figure out while I was testing here is that if you actually hang from the cliffs here on the sides, depending on where you're hanging, you actually will either take half a heart or a full heart of damage. If I remember correctly, I tested this in the N64 and GameCube version. This was not the same. You always took a flat rate of damage, but for some reason in the 3DS version, I guess there's just maybe a tiny frame of like height difference. I couldn't really tell, even testing in no clips. Who knows what that's about? Upon countless tests, I was only able to replicate the roll a few times, not really understanding why. The most common situation seemed to be when I was hanging from a ledge, but this was before I knew that, for some reason, the height difference was a thing. That being said, as long as you are hanging from a ledge that is short enough, you get 100% consistency while holding forward to roll. Next, I moved on to Goron City, mostly because of the height variation here. We have the ropes that are moving at different elevations, as well as the different layers in the interior here. It didn't take long to realize how inconsistent this was as well. I would move just a very small frame or even jump from the same location and have a totally different reaction. With very minimal movement, sometimes I would take damage, or sometimes not at all, and on the very rare occasion I would also perform a roll. All of these I could not figure out what was going on. Clearly the height variation was not the issue though. At this point, I decided to do some research of my own just to see if I could figure out if anyone's already talked about this before. It was met with some interesting results. In particular, I found this GameFAQs discussion from like 14 years ago. Very good read. Hey guys, how do I roll off a cliff? Holding forward doesn't work anymore.
They didn't change anything. If you hold forward at a moderate height, you'll roll and avoid taking damage. If you're up too high, this won't work and you'll take damage regardless. That's all there is to it. Holy crap!
That's not true. On the console / N64, I could always do it to avoid taking damage.
Dude, don't even post if you don't even know what you're talking about. Jump off the cliff at the top of Death Mountain and see what f***ing happens.
With that very passionate and intense and also incorrect sum of information, it was time to start informing my own thoughts. Working on my own version of the game, I've actually learned a lot of really useless details. For example, the rupees here in Kokiri Forest near the fences, if you do backflips, you can actually collect them here. At first you might think these are just randomly placed here, but actually in fact if you target these rocks, you're supposed to learn that you can perform a backflip in order to collect them. These are what are known as Wonder Rupees. Wonder Rupees are invisible rupees or other items that are activated through invisible triggers. For example, the hopping stones here, when you hop across all three in the right sequential order, will give you a blue rupee. That is also a Wonder Rupee. Now, what you might not know is there's actually another Wonder Rupee here in Kokiri Forest very similar to the hopping stones. If you actually hop across the river area here, you can actually get another blue rupee, though the timing on it is very short, and even more so on the 3DS version, to the point where it's almost impossible to actually get. So if you didn't know about it and you've only played the 3DS version, you at least have a little bit of leniency. As you can see, here's actually an example of someone performing it, and you can see just how precise this actually is. This related topic was actually part of a question I had asked long ago. Apparently the deciding factor was something related to the fact that the timer was not set properly based on the frame rate increase from 20 to 30 from the N64/GameCube up to the 3DS version. With this in mind, I began forming a hypothesis that maybe there was some sort of internal timer that was also shortened due to this frame rate change. This would explain why the fall height didn't seem to be affecting things, but rather the time that I was in the air could be. But that can't be it, because we did confirm that hanging from a ledge allows you to do those longer falls still. It was finally time I sought for some help, and who better than Hylian Freddy, the guy who recorded that Wonder Rupee video, as well as other glitches and oversights in the OOT world. He provided a key piece of the puzzle explaining that apparently Grezzo added a certain check that ends up preventing a roll during a regular jump. This would explain why hanging from the ledges works, because you never enter that jump animation. After testing more and watching some of my previous footage, I also confirmed that simply falling instead of performing any sort of jump also allowed me to do those rolls. Interestingly enough as well, there's a very specific short jump you can perform in Death Mountain that also allows you to roll out of it. The animation for the jump very much looks the same though. Finally, there is a certain jump that you can still perform and still be able to roll out of. It's almost impossible to see the difference though. Here's one version, and then here's the other. There's like very minimal difference. The only thing I can sort of see is that on the smaller hop, you kind of start falling faster, but the animation is the exact same. I had actually previously attempted rolling and jumping off of the Zora's Domain waterfall as an adult, and you can actually clearly see here that falling off does in fact allow you to roll out of it, ignoring the part where there's the height difference here with the water mound and the actual floor. Hover boots are actually another way of avoiding taking fall damage, because when you equip them, you actually aren't able to make any sort of jumps. You always enter the fall state after the hover ends. I did try several different methods of avoiding that normal jump, such as side hopping, backflipping, and other things. For whatever reason though, those also appear to prevent any sort of rolling out of. Using any sort of targeting method as well also didn't change any of the results. You may be thinking, wow, that's a lot of information about the roll. I didn't know that. Well, there's actually more. There are some locations that actually provide exceptions to the fall damage rule. One of the most noteworthy ones is in the area in Dodongo's Cavern where you enter the boss room. While the first time you enter does actually play as a cutscene, if you do re-enter this area, you can see that you do in fact avoid taking fall damage. Funnily enough, you can actually still take damage if you do a well-timed side jump and land in the lava area. Trying to do this further down the normal path line seems to still avoid taking the damage, so a couple things it could either be a very long collision check of some kind, it could also just not extend to that height area, something along those lines, who knows, who cares. Two similar examples to this are also in Jabu Jabu, where you can fall into these orifices, and once again, if you jump just the right way, you can actually fall into this lower area and take damage still. The second is in Deku Tree, which is actually somewhat unique, where if you jump from the very top here all the way down into the water, when you land on the specific water platform here, you actually just don't take the damage. But if you land anywhere else here that's not in the actual deep pool, you will still take damage. When I first ran into this, I actually thought that just standing in any sort of water allowed you to avoid the damage, and I thought it was some sort of silly Minecraft water bucket clutch situation. But testing this anywhere else did not yield that same result. I do love to imagine though, Link just carrying a Minecraft water bucket around. I also actually tested the 3DS version of Majora's Mask, and it turns out to be the same issue still. I don't know why I was super surprised by that, but I guess I assumed that because Link turns into different characters, there would be some sort of change in the coding for that. With Goron Link, you actually aren't really able to jump, so he does actually perform the regular tuck and roll. It is very silly though, because you kind of roll into the Goron ball mode for just half a second and then it cuts off. Deku Scrub also actually doesn't have a roll feature, so no matter what height you jump from, even if you perform a fall, you'll always take damage. Which is even funnier thinking back on the Deku Scrub that teaches you about falling and rolling, because he himself can't even perform that sort of thing. Random additional piece of info about that roll as well. Doesn't really fit anywhere in the video, I just figured I'd mention it. If you're in the roll state, you actually are invulnerable to damage, which is cool. So if you timed your rolls perfectly, you could just always avoid taking damage, such as in this area with the Deku Scrubs when you're on your way to Sacred Meadow. Finally, after all the research I did, I figured it was good to also debug certain myths because there were a lot floating around. One of those examples being jump attacks. You can't perform any sort of jump attack to avoid or change the outcome of the jump or fall damage. Another one was that people believed if you timed the A button really well, you could actually perform the roll manually in order to avoid that damage. Believe me, I tried, I have a turbo button, that is not possible. Last myth is that despite the height difference between adult and child, you actually still take the same fall damage regardless of height. Adult Link does not have stronger legs. In the end, the only real thing that was left unanswered was why that code was added in the first place. I asked around to see if anyone would be willing to spend the countless hours, I'm sure, looking through the source code and figuring out exactly what it's connected with, but let's be honest, no one wants to do that. Either way, it is very fascinating to see just how much information I gathered from this one feature. I definitely didn't intend to make a video out of this. The original plan was I was just implementing it for, again, my game here, and I needed to figure out the specifics of how it worked. If there was any good thing that did come out of this, it's the fact that I did figure out the best way to avoid taking damage despite any fall. Here it is. Hey! If you made it this far, that means you enjoyed the video, hopefully. This is definitely a very different format than what I usually do, so hopefully it paid off. I definitely put a lot more effort into this than I normally do for most videos, as evidenced by me literally going out and rolling. So if you liked it, definitely consider checking out my other stuff here. I'm working on a lot of different projects here, so if you have any interest in those, I would definitely recommend it. Currently, I'm working on a multiplayer game that is through Unreal Engine, and I'm also, of course, updating the Ocarina of Time Minecraft map to be multiplayer and potentially have a randomizer feature. So definitely check those out if those interest you. I'm currently working on those right now. There is also a Discord link down below, so if you want to continue keeping up to date with what I'm doing, definitely join that and take a look. But other than that, hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys in the next video. What the tuck and roll does, you may ask, is perform a roll where you tuck yourself. In the beginning of the game, ow, ow, ow. Ooh. Oh. Jump off the cliff at the top of Death Mountain and see what freaking happens.